Hi, welcome back. This is the
Hi.
Hi. What up? Okay, so for this video, we're gonna approach things a bit different. We figured that in the end, like usually you see like a cooking video and you get a recipe and you get a whole bunch of recipes from all kinds of videos, and then in the end you didn't really learn much because you didn't really see how they approach things. So in this case, I'm gonna show you how we approach things and create stuff ourselves and what you have to look for, what are the ways of making stuff basically. So for this case, we just made like a basic type of... What the... Woman freaked out because of the sponge.
Yeah.
Who owns a pretty sponge? But yeah, so in this case, I'm just gonna make a simple, very simple, like snack sort of. You can basically do at whatever type of greeting you have, like if you have guests over or something like that, just like leave a little snack there for somebody to eat and be like, whoa, that's cool, that's kind of nice. But yeah, for this case, we're working with tapioca. If you don't know what tapioca is, it's basically a starch that is made out of the cassava root.
The what?
The cassava root. In Germany, we will call it manioc.
Ah.
Exactly. It's like one of the purest types of starch, actually. Like instead of like, there's like basically no nutrients in there. Like the chip is going to be kind of similar to what like the rice chip, remember from the cabbage thing?
Yeah.
Yeah, sort of like that. If you see the ways we approach this now, you will probably figure out ways to approach different things as well. So yeah, so it basically comes from the cassava plant, which is the root basically in the bottom. It gives a type of potato-y slash radish type of vibes sort of from the looks of it, but all in all it's a whole bunch of starch, and I think it's like 34% of starch inside one of those roots. And the funny thing is that it's actually poisonous if you eat it raw, but the thing is they wash it a whole bunch, then they roast it, and then you get like this powdery stuff out of it, and then you have your starch that is completely free of poison, whatever. So like I said, there's no nutrients inside there, there's no gluten inside there, so there's nothing in there that could trigger an allergy or anything. So it's very, very pure starch. So we're gonna make a chip out of the starch and saffron Weasley. So yeah, it's called saffron. For some reason. So yeah, we're gonna make a chip out of saffron, we're gonna make a mayo out of miso, and we're gonna pickle some onions. It's just for the basic understanding how these chips sort of work and how you can approach chips like that. So I'm gonna show you how you can figure out a texture that will eventually become something in the end. So you have an eye for those things. You know, that's the approach of this educational series sort of. Okay, so starting off with our broth. Thing is, for the flavor itself, we're just gonna make a very basic type of broth. We're gonna use saffron for this, since it has a lot of flavor, which also is a thing about this, because the thing is that the situation is that we're gonna deep fry the chip in the end, which means it's gonna lose a lot of flavor due to high temperatures. That means if you use something with very, very large amounts of flavor, then you will have the higher chance of having flavor in your chip in the end. So anyway, so this is basically why we are using saffron, and you could use anything else, but I guess this makes a difference. So like I said, no recipes for this. We're just gonna take some of this. There's a lot of flavor in these things, so we're just gonna take, okay, this is too much. Bit, you know, throw some in.
As a present from a friend of mine.
That's true, we did.
Props.
Props on you. So we basically have our saffron in here. Now we're just gonna add some water, make a basic broth out of this, like just a really basic broth. This is just for show purposes, right?
The thing is, there are people who don't know what basic broth means.
Basic broth, just like we need water and it's supposed to be flavored. That's it. That's my basic broth. Very simple, nothing spectacular, no 12,000 ingredients with this kind of meat used from this type of, like, no, just really basic. Hey, almost a tea, you know? That's how the approach is.
Okay, let's make saffron tea.
Right, sort of. So we just added water, our saffron. So the only thing to do now is just put this on the stove, heat it up until it starts boiling, then let it settle for a few hours, and that's it. No more boiling after that, just heat it up once and then it's done. Let it rest for a bit, and then that's it. You don't know what we're doing now?
No.
Okay, so I guess while that is happening, we're gonna start with the mayonnaise, right? And for mayonnaise, this is gonna be very, very simple. And just like I said, this is not about the recipe. It's about the approach you could use to make your own things. So in this case, I'm gonna use miso. It's gonna be dark miso, but it doesn't matter. You could use garlic, you could use any type of sauce if it's thick enough and has enough flavor.
Like fresh garlic, just
Just
peel
use-
it, just cut it, and then you can.
Exactly. Yeah, you can make a sick aioli out of that. It's not going to be the typical aioli, obviously, because you make it in different ways and different countries or whatever, but you could make...
Does it have to be like creamy or something like that, or just cut it in really small pieces?
You could just chop it down. You can even just squish it because we're going to blend it anyway. So,
Okay.
exactly. So it just has to have... You could use anything. You can use ketchup if you want to. Like, who cares? But
Ketchup, mayonnaise. So
ketchup, mayonnaise. So, like, yeah, but I'm just saying, like, you could use anything. So we got miso here. This is dark miso, by the way. I'm just gonna throw this in here. The thing is, we're gonna use milk for this, right? I know this looks horrible. It looks like I've just emptied out my coffee machine. So I'm just gonna drop my miso in here. And the thing we're gonna use for this is milk and oil. The thing about milk and oil, milk has like these milk proteins inside that work as an emulsifying agent on a natural way, sort of. You could also use lecithin as well, which you could just add to typically water, and that will work as well. But that's a different sheet of paper. But for this video, we're just gonna focus on the mayonnaises you can make just out of milk and oil, basically. So milk and oil. No egg, you don't need egg for this. So we're just gonna take our miso, add a little bit of milk, any type of oil, milk, any type of whatever you put in there. Just gonna wanna blend this. So what you wanna do is you wanna blend the oil into the most amount of movement. Like if you're moving the oil through blending, you wanna typically drip the oil into the spot where the most movement is happening. Otherwise it's not gonna like emulsify properly, or you might go too much at once and it's not perfectly balanced, so it will spread out again and then you'll have like oil and milk separated, whatever. But if you do it inside the movement, then nothing should happen. If you go slowly as well. So yeah, now I'm just gonna pour a little bit in there, keep blending, pour a little bit more, keep blending, and that's until the texture is there that I want. Back to the broth, right? So we have our broth with saffron. It's been there for a while, it's taken all the flavor, and now we're just gonna add our starch to this thing. We're gonna use tapioca starch like we would use typical potato starch. Just take some, add it to a bowl, you know, add some water on top, mix it through, and then we're gonna heat up our broth, right? So this is gonna be at a boiling temperature. And I'm just gonna heat this up, bring it to a boil, and while that is happening, I'm gonna add a little bit of water to this and kind of mix it through a bit with a spoon, just like you would use regular starch. A tapioca starch water broth liquid thing.
Ah, it's actually like you
Thicken up a sauce, like I would thicken up a sauce, basically. Just using tapioca starch at this point.
Like how I do some kind of fruit pudding.
See, you're gonna wait until that is boiling, and then you're just gonna go a little by little and see until you have the texture that you want. Okay, so now you can see it's already starting to boil, so we're gonna add a little bit of starch and keep stirring it for a while, you know? We're gonna go little by little so we can control more of what we're doing here. Okay, more. More. That's good. Look at that. It's starting to get really thick. Nice and stirring. And a little bit more. All right. A little bit more. And there we go. Boiling like crazy, and we're done. So at some point in cooking, you're probably gonna realize a texture that you need when you see it. So this, for instance, would be something that can turn out to be something. Makes no sense, right? But thing is, like if you look at this and you spread it out, the thing is if you have something, everything instead of water, right, will evaporate. So if you're gonna spread something out on a sheet like this, either you give it high temperatures, like above 100 degrees Celsius, or below temperatures, below 100 degrees Celsius, it's always going to have a different effect, but the water is always going to evaporate. So that means everything else is going to stay there. Like for instance, you're going to mix water and flour, right? And you're going to spread that out here and put it in the oven. The water is going to evaporate, but what's going to stay? The flour, in form of maybe, depending on the temperatures you used, like for instance 150 degrees Celsius, you're going to have like a bread crunchy type of thing because all the water is out but the crisp is still there. And that's basically, you could do with anything. Like say you have a fruit puree, you're going to spread out a fruit puree on this thing and all the water is going to go out, but the sugar inside the fruit and the fruit itself is still going to be there. Depending on the temperatures they use, you're going to have a different like result in the end. Like for instance, you go like around 70 degrees Celsius, you're going to have like a leathery type of texture depending on how long you leave it in the oven. So we're just going to spread this out. This looks like a texture that will turn out to be something once it's been in the oven or if it's been dried, you know? So whenever you have like these creamy, thick things, you could always think, okay, you know what will happen if I put this in the oven on a spread on a sheet like this?
Yeah, what it looks like. It might be candy.
No, it's not gonna be candy, I'm sorry.
Was it actually saffron that stayed in your mouth as long?
That's the flavor of saffron that stayed.
I don't want to eat saffron candy.
Should be fine, depends on what you serve it with. If it's just saffron, of course that's gonna stay in your mouth for a while. But the thing is, at this point, we're using a whole bunch of other stuff. We're using the mayo, plus we're using something so intense like a pickled vegetable, where all the acidity is inside. That's gonna just kill off the flavor like in the afterwards, you know? It's the combination about that. Like, if you know these basic techniques, you can vary that with a whole bunch of things. Like you don't have to use saffron. You could use anise or what else? I don't know, tea if you want to. But well, maybe tea doesn't give enough flavor. But still,
Cinnamon.
like cinnamon. You can totally use cinnamon if you want to. But and vary that with a whole bunch of other flavors. The point of it is that you get the basic of how to make this. You know, what else you do with this? This is up to you, basically. So like I said, we're just gonna take this one and throw it in the oven by about 100 degrees. We're not gonna, Celsius obviously, we're not gonna give it too much temperature because we don't want it to roast, we want it to dry, but we want it to dry quickly, so we're using 100 degrees. And then you just have to keep looking at it, like how long does it take in the oven? I'm not 100% sure. I'm guessing around like 15 to 20 minutes. Just look inside, if it's completely dry, you're done.
You're done.
You're done. So, this is how it's supposed to look like in the end. You can do all kinds of other stuff. Like I said, just try how much you need of everything. If it doesn't work, do another one. Or maybe do 2 at the same time or 3 at the same time, depending on how you want it. And in the end, you can scale it out and see how much you needed. And then you have your recipe, your own recipe of how to make these super amazing chips. Okay, the thing is though, they're not done yet. We're gonna kind of puff them up like rice chips. Like, you remember the chips that we did for the cabbage dish with the fermented red cabbage sauce and the rice chip that we did basically on the same type like this? And you see, there's a connection. Yeah, that's basically what we're doing. We're gonna just deep fry this thing at very high temperature, so then it puffs up, and that's gonna be our base chip for the stuff that we're gonna add on top. You can add anything on top that you want. It's a nice little snack in between, and yeah, I'll totally swear on this thing. So we're gonna get the oil heated up, get it to about like 200, 210, 200-ish degrees Celsius, and then we're just gonna deep fry that. All right, so we got our pieces, right? We're just gonna throw this in. We have about 210 degrees Celsius oil. We're just gonna throw it in, squish it a little bit, you know, and there you go. It's puffed. That's it. So what we did here, we actually have still old ones left from our first trial. In this one, we used a little bit more tapioca starch and a little bit more saffron. No salt though, so that's why we had to season this one afterwards. This one is the one that we did today, you've just seen, and you can already tell the difference. Like obviously this one had it a little bit more starch in, that's why it's got a little bit more full, has more color because of the saffron, and I'm guessing that would be more better. So I guess, yeah, adding more starch to the thing makes it a little bit thicker. Also, you can stripe it out a little bit more thicker on the what's it called? the silicone mat, and then you should probably have a better result in the end. So yeah, a little bit more starch, a little bit more saffron, and you have a little bit better result in the end. So that's also a part of this whole thing, is always trial and error, you know? It's never perfect the first time, or rare occasions it will be perfect the first time, let's say it like that. So coming to the last component of our thing, this is just to give a little sour kick to the whole thing. Since we have the saffron, we have the mayonnaise, nothing is really too sour in there that gives like the flavor touch of that, and like a corner in that whole flavor company over there. So we're trying to give it a pickled component. In this case, we're gonna use the old pickle juice that we used back then for the other video with the pickle thing. I'll probably put a link here somehow. And if you wanna figure out how to make that, there's a link to that. But just for basic instructions on how to make a pickle stock, it's just, you need a lot of vinegar, you need some...
Salt.
No, and sugar.
Ah, sugar. Salt
Exactly.
was fermenting.
Exactly. You're gonna take away the sourness with sweetness. You could also leave it sour as well. It's just for your flavor preference, but you will need, for pickling, you will need a lot of sourness. So,
And you can just reuse it without...
yeah, you can totally reuse
You
it.
can just use it and that's it?
That's basically it, yes. You could, depending on the size of the product you want to pickle. In this case though, it's really small, thin slices though, so there's nothing to really grab against there. You can, if you have a really thin slice, you can just leave it in the pickle stock and the vinegar will do the job. If you have something that is kind of bigger, like for instance, you have a thick slice of beetroot or something, that's gonna take time obviously, because the vinegar is not gonna go all in there and like break it up and do the job on itself. But I'm gonna show you here real quick. Just gonna take this onion, cut it in half.
Without peeling it?
Without peeling, I'm gonna peel it afterwards.
Ah, okay.
I've showed you this a million times, woman. You know this. You know this. All right, so we have our onion, right? This is just to give it a slight kick, like I said. So I'm just gonna slice it down. Exactly, nice and thin. And a pickle stock, you can season with any type of flavor that you prefer. Let's say you take star anise, say you take cinnamon, say you take saffron, whatever you want, you can put it in there and then you're... No, I'm talking about seasonings. You could also use chocolate if you want to, like let's say the cocoa beans, for instance, but chocolate, the problem is the chocolate's gonna melt. And then you're gonna have that stuff in your pickle stock and it's gonna probably look very weird, change the consistency. Like you could probably do something like that if you wanna try.
It's about looks, it just has to taste good.
That's right, but it still has to be like sort of, I don't know, you could try. I would highly...
Next time.
I wouldn't recommend it, to be honest. But yeah, you can totally go for that. Now we're just gonna take our pickle stock, add this in here, you know. This is the same one that we used back then. This is literally the same one that we used about 5 weeks ago. So that's how long, it's still okay. And it's been outside the whole time. I'm just gonna throw this in here. And since it's so thin slices, you can leave it in here for 5 minutes and then it's fine. Okay, so now we have everything, right? Thing is, now we're gonna try to find the balancing between all these. So we just tried one of them, so now we know kind of more what's going on. But the thing is that this one, like the chip, the saffron chip, is very dominant in its flavor, which means the miso will probably not go against that. So it would make more sense to actually take the lighter version of the saffron chip. So that would be a point of learning, basically. So the next time I would make these, I would take the lesser version, but with still more tapioca inside, since this one is not as dominant. Or I would make this one more dominant and instead leave this one the same, but then we would just have an overflow on flavors, right? But yeah, in the end, just for plating purposes now that I know that this here is a bit lighter than this one, I will just balance it by putting more on top, right? One, two, three, and here. Now we have a little ship. Look how soft they've turned out. From only being in there for about like 10 minutes or so, they're like super soft already. Just dripping it off a little bit. You can also leave it on there if you want to, but I'm just doing it now for the purpose of letting the chip survive. Just gonna take this, add this to our chip, add another dot on top, make it more dimensional. Now we're just gonna add some fresh herbs. How's it called, woman?
Blood dog?
Something bloody dock? Something like that.
Red-winged duck?
Yeah, something like that. Alright, here we have our snack.